Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum.
Hoosier fans, it's Indiana basketball time. IU Basketball Mini-Series tickets are now available in 6-game or 3-game ticket packages, as well as individual games. This is your chance to check out the Hoosiers inside beautiful Simon Scott Assembly Hall. For more information, call or text 812-855-4006 or visit IUHoosiers.com. Go IU!
On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Alex Bozich and I are joined by our old friend Zach McCrite. You know him as Big EZ on Twitter. Zach, a longtime radio voice, now doing work in the Louisville area. Spent time the last couple of seasons calling Romeo Langford's games in New Albany. So we spend a lot of time talking with Zach, just kind of reflecting on the first 9 games of Indiana's season, giving our impressions, certainly focusing on the 2 recent Big Ten games that have Indiana off to a 2-0 start, and his thoughts on Romeo, how that transition to college has gone, and also some of the great play of Rob Finney that we've seen lately, and many other topics. And then we also look ahead to the Louisville game. Zach has a lot of insight about Louisville, that game coming up on Saturday, so we spend some time talking about that as well. All of that this week on Podcast on the Brink. Before we get to that, a quick word from our sponsor, Home Field. At homefieldapparel.com, you will find the comfiest and most unique licensed IU apparel that is available anywhere. Home Field Apparel was started by an IU grad, and all their apparel is designed and printed out of Indianapolis. And this holiday season, you can find the perfect holiday gift for the IU fan in your life with many of the options that they have. 2 in particular that you should think about. 1, they've got this tri-blend fleece hoodie. I wore it this morning. It's really cold here in Dallas. It was my first option. I've only had it for a couple of weeks, and it's already become my go-to option when it's cold outside, and I don't need to get dressed up. I can just throw this hoodie on. I absolutely love it. Wear it as often as I can because it's got a really cool Bison logo, the old IU Bison logo, and it's just so comfortable. So I've got that. They've got a lot of other items featuring these really cool vintage kind of retro designs from IU history, and I just got an email from them this morning. They've got a new retro IU basketball raglan tee. It's one of those that's got like the 3/4 length arms, and it says Indiana Hoosiers on it, and it's got the old logo with like the Chuck Taylor looking shoes that are red with the IU on it. Really cool looking shirt. So they've got those. They've got many others that you should check out. And whether you're purchasing for yourself or if you're getting a gift for Christmas, remember that the cutoff for guaranteed Christmas delivery is December 19th, so you want to be sure to get your order in before then. And, of course, don't forget to use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, at checkout, because that will give you 15% off your first order. Again, the URL is homefieldapparel.com. The promo code is BRINK, B-R-I-N-K. Home Field, wear one for the team. And now, here is my conversation with Alex Bozich and Zach McCrite. All right, and we are here this week on Podcast on the Brink with Alex Bozich, as we always are, and Big EZ, Zach McCrite. Zach, welcome back to Podcast on the Brink. It's always great when you join us.
It's always great to be here. You're too kind. This is a lot of fun for me. I get to riff about my favorite team, which is not always the case when you're doing sports radio in Louisville. So this is a lot of fun for me.
Yes. So let's start out just reflecting real quick on the game that we just saw, Penn State. Obviously, big win for Indiana. They moved to 2-0 in the conference, coming on the heels of the close shave against Northwestern. And, I think everybody would look at those 2 games and say there have been some imperfections, there have been some issues, there's certainly some things that need to get better. But at the end of the day, you get through these 2 Big Ten games, these 2 December Big Ten games at 2-0. And so overall, I think you have to feel pretty good. Alex, start with you. Coming out of that Penn State game, what were some of your thoughts on Indiana's performance?
Well, anytime you win a road game in the Big Ten, it's a positive, no matter how it happens. And Jerod, we've talked about this a little bit. Some of the reaction I feel from the IU fans is a little, I think, over the top, just in terms of not realizing the fact that, this is still the first month of the season, and they just went into what is, to me, I'm not going to call it one of the more difficult environments, but it's a sterile environment, and it is one of those places where you can go. I've been there for a game, and you show up, there's not a lot of energy in the building, and all of a sudden you can look up and you're down 9-0, which is exactly what happened to IU last night. And, the things I would be encouraged by the first half, the turnovers seemed to disappear, at least for a half. Romeo Langford really carried IU offensively, I thought, for the latter stages of the first half. Better free throw shooting on the road, which was a good thing. And then just the overall fact that they found a way to win the game. As I wrote today in 5 takeaways, they had a ton of close games here early in the season. And I feel like if not for those experiences, yesterday's probably a game they don't win. So overall, I think anytime you're able to win a conference road game, because you're probably only going to win realistically 3, 4, or 5 a year, unless you're a team that's going to win the league. I think you have to look at a conference road win this early in the season, getting off to a 2-0 start as a positive thing.
Zach, what were your biggest takeaways from the game?
I sentiment a lot of what Alex said. What's funny is I walked away from that game going, and just as an IU fan, I know there are some like me out there as an IU fan who has struggled to come to grips with this being a different team other than the late Crean teams and even last year's Archie team. You walk out of that game and go, oh man, we had a 13-point lead with 4 minutes to go. What are we doing? We only win by 2, and late struggles down the finish. And thank God Penn State missed 11 free throw or however many free throws it ended up being. And those are I know there are some IU fans that are conditioned like me to go, woe is IU basketball and woe is me, the IU basketball fan. And then you watch Michigan have to fight tooth and nail with Northwestern on the road. And you're like, okay, all right. I get it. This is the way it's going to be. It's the way it's going to be. And it's not necessarily a mark against Indiana basketball, although we are conditioned by what we've seen in previous years, recent previous years, to feel that way. That it doesn't have to be that way. Yes, IU was one possession away from being beat when they had a double-digit lead at the final media timeout, but it didn't happen. So that might be something, as Alex said, that's different. And if you just give it a minute, I know some people, and I know we were talking before we hit the record button. There are some people out there that are, and if they're in the minority, they're just a loud minority that are going, this is wrong and this is wrong, and yeah, we beat Penn State, but it's just Penn State and all of the like. But you're 2-0 in conference. And I'm not saying they're world beaters that you've beaten, but one of them is on the road. And these are probably games that even last year, as early as last year, I think IU loses. So all in all, I think you have to be more positive than negative for sure.
Yeah, and a couple of top 50 wins. Those are wins that are going to be valuable down the line. I'll tell you the thing that was different for me about that game is, when Indiana got down early, it's like, oh man, this is not the start we need. And in the past, you really would have had to hope that Indiana shot their way back into the game. And the difference last night is it took Indiana's offense a long time to get going. Obviously, the 2 threes that Devontae Green hit really kind of got things going, and then Romeo took over, over the second half of the first half. But it was really Indiana's defense that just they just grinded their way back into the game with defense, because they really just kind of shut down Penn State, made them really go on kind of a big drought. And that gave the offense some time to get back going and get back into it. And so I think, it's the biggest change, and we knew it was the change Archie was going to want to make to the program, is make this a defensive-oriented program. And I thought you really saw that last night because, the defense was good. And Alex, you had some great numbers that you can talk about here in a minute in 5 takeaways, about some of the defense Indiana has played. The other big takeaway for me from that game is it's a game Indiana wins by 2. Look at the last play of the first half and the last play of the second half. Last play of the first half, Rob Finney makes that great drive in, that beautiful little scoop shot, hits the bucket. It puts Indiana up 34-30. Gives them the lead that you kind of felt they should have had. For some reason, like at the end of that, a 2-point lead going into halftime just didn't feel like enough. But the 4-point lead, you go in feeling a little bit better. And then the very last play of the game, that play was designed to get the ball to Lamar Stevens. They set a screen for him. It looked like they just kind of wanted to try and get him open over there in the left corner or on the left wing through just kind of confusion and a lot of congestion. And Rob Finney sees that Justin Smith isn't going to be able to get through the screen, immediately switches over and makes a great play, and they don't even get a shot. And for a freshman to be able to do that on the road, make 2 plays that big, right there at the end of halves, those are big moments. Those are big plays. And so, he's been a guy, he was a revelation early in the season. He struggled a little bit, in some of the games as the competition got a little bit better. But we really saw him kind of come back and be such an important part for this team last night, especially in the second half. He was really terrific. So, and those 2 things, being able to grind your way back into a game defensively and having a point guard you can trust to make big plays in key moments. When people point to things and say, like, well, how have things improved? How are things better? Right there. That's how things have improved and how things are better, because it's not, yes, Penn State missed free throws, and there are some things in that game that obviously helped Indiana win, but defense and a heady point guard are things that travel and things that can help you game in, game out that Indiana hasn't had, and they showed that last night. And so that, to me, is why that win was impressive, Alex.
Yeah, and the defense to me is the key thing, and we talked about this earlier, Jerod, and you mentioned it, what I wrote in 5 takeaways today. I just, on a whim, kind of looked at Indiana's resume so far defensively this season, and they've played 9 games, and I'm referencing here opponent points per possession. 3 times out of those 9 games, it's been the lowest points per possession performance for that opponent of the season. 3 times it's been their second lowest. Twice it's been their third lowest. And then the one outlier is the UC Davis, where they still held the UC Davis game, where IU still held them under a point per possession. But UC Davis has been really a kind of a poor offensive team this year, and that was their 7th lowest number of the season. And the thing that kind of stands out to me, the Duke game, right? Indiana gave up 1.14 points per possession against Duke. That's Duke's 2nd worst offensive performance of the season. So it's Marquette. It was their worst offensive performance of the season. Penn State, their worst. Northwestern, 3rd lowest. So these are quality teams that Indiana's locking up. Right now, they're 20th, I think, in Ken Palm's adjusted defensive efficiency. Last year at this time, through 9 games, Indiana had given up more than a point per possession 6 out of 9 games. They've done it once this year. So numbers don't lie. It's right there for those who want to see it. The defense is definitely better in year 2 of the Archie Miller era.
Let's talk a little bit about Romeo. Zach, you called a lot of Romeo's games. Alex, obviously you saw Romeo up close in New Albany. And he's been such an important player for this team. And, like last night at the end of the first half, he carries them offensively. It was similar to what he did in the Arkansas game, where he kept Indiana alive in the first half just because he was so good offensively. And we saw during that stretch just the many ways that he can score. The great drive that he had where he, shot fake and finished with his left hand. Some of the step back jumpers. He made a 3. It's always, when he goes on those runs, it's always so impressive to me the many different ways that he can score. But then, Zach, in the second half, he really kind of struggled to get going. I think he only had 2 points in the second half, wasn't getting the ball for long stretches. So, and there's been some talk. Romeo, obviously, he's using more possessions than anybody, 25.7%. He's taken way more shots than anybody. But it does still feel like maybe there are other ways Indiana can get him going that will evolve as the season goes. So when you watch a game like last night and he just goes off in the first half, struggles in the second half, is that, him just kind of not taking control enough in the second half, the offense not forcing the ball into his hands? Like, to what do you attribute him, or maybe it was Penn State's defense that, was really just denying him the ball. To what do you attribute him kind of struggling to get going in the second half?
Well, I don't know. I'm always afraid to talk about this because of how close I was able to follow him and in high school, and I just wonder if maybe I've just got too much of an emphasis on him because of how often I saw him play in high school. So I'm glad you brought it up. So here I go.
Yeah.
But I am I'm frustrated by his lack of touching the ball in two main points of the game from a time standpoint, and that is the beginning of the game and the end of the game. I feel like in a lot of the close game, and I was just looking at, I missed Northwestern, the end of the Northwestern game, and how often he got a handle of the ball in that one.
He got it a good amount, and actually he kind of took over after JaJuan got hurt because they didn't have another option.
That's right. After JaJuan got hurt, that was a big, and I guess that's a mini asterisk there, but when JaJuan was relegated to the bench, Romeo did take over. That's correct. I was writing down, it started all with me with beginning of games. I always feel like Romeo was very passive out of the gate. And so when you say, what do you attribute it to? Maybe I attribute it just to Romeo. I don't know. Or maybe that's the game plan. But I went back through the play-by-play of the Northwestern game. The first time he is listed in the play-by-play, and of course, for those of you who aren't basketball nerds like us, you'll get listed in the play-by-play for a shot taken, a shot made, a turnover, a steal, a rebound. I think I've got about everything. A free throw attempt made or attempted. He is in there at the first time at the 16:03 mark in the Northwestern game. So he goes a full 4 minutes with getting nothing but a ball and passing it to someone else, if that. And then in the Penn State game, which again Penn State jumped out to a 9-0 lead, his first listing in the play-by-play is at 15:06, where he missed a jumper. That to me is way too long. Way too long. Now, the caveat is, and I can hear people, in my ear, I can hear people listening in their cars right now, screaming back at their podcast player. It's like, we use him, an exorbitant amount already. Do you just want us to use him 50% of the time? And the answer, obviously, to that is no. So I'm torn with it as well. Last night, the last listing of him in the second half is at the 5:25 mark left in the game. With a missed layup. He did get credited with a turnover with like a minute and change left. So there was one more in there. But from an offensive standpoint, he had a missed layup at the 5:25 mark of the second half and did not take another shot attempt the rest of the game. And to me, I feel like that's close to uncalled for, especially when you could see in the final 4 minutes of the half or of the second half, things eroding almost completely. So I don't know. You try to find the balance, and I know it's a tough balance to find between giving Romeo the ball too much and not giving Romeo the ball enough. But my hope would be that if he is used 20 some odd % of the offensive possessions, that maybe some of them would come more at the beginning of games and at the end of games. The Northwestern finish notwithstanding.
Hey there, let's take a quick break and talk about tickets. As you know, getting tickets online can be complicated. There are hundreds of sites. Each has kind of its own level of reliability, which you never quite know what that is. And so it's hard to know who to trust. And that's why SeatGeek is the way to go. SeatGeek pulls millions of tickets into one place so you can easily find the seats that you want for a price that you're willing to pay. There really is nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for great value. So many big home games on the Big Ten schedule this year. You're going to want to get to some of them live, to see JaJuan's last go-around in the Big Ten, to see what maybe Romeo's only go-around in the Big Ten, and to watch this IU team, see how they gel, see if they can compete in what is sure to be a rough-and-tumble Big Ten schedule this year. And when you're going to go see those games, whether it's an IU home game or in a road venue, SeatGeek is the place that you should go because their entire system is designed to make the ticket buying experience easier than ever. As I've told you on many of these ad spots, what makes it so great is that they search multiple ticket sites, they grade every ticket based on value, and so it helps you to identify the best seats that fit your budget. Make sure that you get good value for your money, and this is really important, every purchase is fully guaranteed so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. That is huge. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. I use it. I think it's the easiest way to shop for tickets. And so I highly recommend it to you as well. Best of all, since you're a listener to Podcast on the Brink, you get $10 off your first SeatGeek purchase. So download the SeatGeek app, enter the promo code BRINK, BRINK, and you will get $10 off your first SeatGeek purchase. SeatGeek, life's an event. We have the tickets. Was he a guy in high school that would kind of ease his way into games? Like, is that just kind of a thing for him? Or is that just how, like you said, maybe it's a game plan thing?
Not that I recall, and Alex can probably back me up. I mean, I feel like there were a handful of times where we're talking at the end of the first quarter, Romeo's got 15 or 17 points. So it's not anything that I recall. The way I attribute it, and I could be way off here. This could be complete game plan stuff from Archie, but the way I attribute it is he looks like a freshman who doesn't want to rattle the cage too much with his upperclassmen teammates. That's what it looks like to me. Like, okay, for the first couple of minutes, guys, I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm just going to stand in the corner for a little bit on offense. And then, once we start getting into a groove, we move the offense around a little bit, then maybe I'll start to assert myself a little more. That's what it looks like to me. I have no idea if that's the case. That's just a guess.
Alex?
Well, the one thing I will say, and I think Zach makes a lot of good points, is more often than not, well, at least these last two games, he's had probably 2 of the 10, 15 best defenders in the league on him. I mean, the Northwestern game, he had Vic Law, who's a senior, who is 6'7", 6'8", and long on him for the majority of the game. And then yesterday, he had Josh Reeves, who you can probably debate. Xavier Simpson of Michigan is probably the best defensive guard in the Big Ten, but Josh Reeves is not far behind. He's been in the top 3 or 5 in the country in steal percentage the last 2 seasons. He's kind of off to a slow start. So, I mean, I think in some ways you have to credit the teams that Indiana's playing for taking him away. And I thought yesterday's game down the stretch, Penn State did a pretty good job of denying Romeo the ball. And that's when Rob Finney just kind of said, hey, you know what, if you're not going to leave any room for me to get in the ball and you're going to overplay things, I'm just going to drive the ball down the lane and I'm going to take this wide open 3. And he made the shots. But I think it's something it's also, you got to remember, we're a month into the season. I think Indiana's going to evolve a lot between now and even January, February, March in terms of how they run their offense. I think Archie's very much a guy who puts a lot of things in as the season goes along. He builds on it. It's not like their whole playbook is set right now, and this is what they're going to run the rest of the season. And so, he's taking the most shot attempts on the team. I think he's averaging something like 17, 18 points a game for a freshman, being 4th, I think, in the league in scoring. It's a good start. Do I agree with Zach that it would be nice for him to have the ball more in clutch situations down the stretch? Absolutely. But I don't think it's anything where it's the Indiana coaching staff wanting to not have the ball in his hands. I think at some point you also have to credit kind of what the defense is giving you, and Indiana's going to have to. That's one reason we've talked about Indiana kind of developing a 3rd and 4th guy behind JaJuan and Romeo, because as the competition level improves, more teams are going to try to take one of those 2 guys or both of them out of the game. So who else can step up and make plays? Yesterday it was Rob Finney.
Yeah, and let me just add, Alex, that I'm all in on this team not being super Romeo oriented. I'm all in. So I don't want people to think that I'm saying Romeo doesn't get the ball enough. He gets the ball plenty. It's just the timing of when he gets it. Again, the Northwestern finish notwithstanding, that felt good. Okay, for an IU fan, the amount that he was getting the ball in the final stretch of the Northwestern game felt right. If that can be the case in the first couple minutes of a game, especially on the road in the Big Ten, and the couple minutes at the end of a game, if it's a clutch time situation, I'm willing to trade having the ball in his hands in those spots of a game for the ones sandwiched in the middle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. One more question about Romeo for you, Zach. To me, watching him, I have been more impressed with his defense than I expected to be. Not that I didn't think he had the tools to be a defender, but I just didn't think that this quickly he would, take on the challenge like he did against Northwestern of playing Vic Law and really playing strong defense. Now, he's had lapses, and, in the Arkansas game especially, he, didn't really seem very attentive defensively, and he'll, he's playing a lot of minutes carrying a heavy load. He's not locked in every possession, but when he really is, he can really defend well. So that has impressed me. What has surprised you, either positively or negatively, about the way that he has transitioned to college basketball?
The defense is number one for sure. I would, and I think I've even mentioned it with you on Assembly Call, Jerod, the handful of times that we talked last year. That was the one thing that I was nervous about when he transitioned from high school to college, was his ability to defend what will usually be a fairly prolific scorer if he's playing against his true position, his true counterpart position. And he has certainly quelled some of those thoughts in my mind. I'm shocked by it, and the way I try to justify it all is that he didn't have to work that hard in high school to get the job done defensively in a lot of situations. And I always looked at it the other way, is that you're going to have to work a whole lot harder if you want to do that in college. And sure enough, he has, or maybe he's doing the same thing. I can't really figure it out, and it's just working there too. It was just a worry, is all I'm saying. Now, the other thing that I think I would go on the other end is, and I think I came on the first Assembly Call with you, Jerod, for this season, the first game, and yeah, that's right, because we were on our way back. I came back, I went to the game, and we were on our way back from Bloomington, and you were like, "Will you just bring everybody's worries to a rest on Romeo's free throw shooting? How good a free throw shooter was he in high school?" I'm like, "He's fine. 76, 78% free throw shooter in high school. Don't worry about it." And I don't know if he's done enough to really stop anybody's worries, but that's the one thing on the negative side that has surprised me a little bit. But other than that,
he's shooting 100% in conference play from the line, so that's good. The
trend line will continue to go up, I'm certain. So I think that's one on both ends that has surprised me for sure. Surprised me positively and negatively.
Alex, how about for you?
Yeah, I'm surprised that his defense has been as solid as it has. But I don't, as a high school player, I think he was always fairly talented on that end of the floor and knew what he was doing. But I think New Albany just kind of needed him to stay on the floor at all times to win games. And so he took plays off because he couldn't afford to get into foul trouble, because basically if he was in foul trouble, New Albany wasn't going to beat any good teams. And so that was just kind of what he had to do. And I think Archie Miller's done a really good job. And there was a little insight into this. I think there was a piece earlier in the season, Jerod, I don't remember, it was on The Athletic, where Archie Miller was kind of talking about Romeo's defense and just kind of how he's tried to motivate Romeo to, this really isn't how you can't take plays off, and you have to be engaged constantly. And if there was a situation, I feel like where he wasn't getting after it defensively, based on the interactions I've seen between player and coach from my vantage point up on Fisher Row, when Romeo doesn't do something, he does something wrong, Archie lets him know about it. And I think he's done a good job of, keeping him engaged defensively, and he's played a ton of minutes. That's the other thing so far. I'm just kind of surprised at how effective he's been overall with the workload of minutes. So, he's playing 83.3% of Indiana's minutes. I think that's in the top 200 of the country for a freshman to take on that big of a workload. I worry of kind of how that's going to, affect him as the season goes along. They definitely need to get some of the other guys more acclimated. Zach McRoberts, Devontae Green, kind of getting their minutes up to kind of take a little of the minute load off of Romeo. But overall, I agree with Zach. I think his defense has been better than advertised. I think the free throw shooting, although I will say on the free throw shooting, Zach, in the state tournament last year, it wasn't great. I think the Warren Central game was the one where we all kind of were scratching our heads and saying what's kind of going on here. And I still kind of feel like Romeo's shot from the perimeter, something just doesn't seem right with it. I don't know if his wrist is still bothering him a little bit. This is kind of something that's going back the last couple of years that we've all kind of noticed from time to time. But I'd like to see the perimeter jump shot become a little bit more consistent. I'm not saying he has to shoot 40%, but if he could, he's at 25.7 now on threes. If he could get that up to 35, mid 30s, I think that's a pretty big development.
And I'll just add at the end of that, just to add on what you were saying, Alex, the wrist. One thing that I noticed, and I can't remember if I told you on Fisher Row. I like that, Fisher Row. I can't remember if I told you this that night or not, but against Chicago State, I know I was telling my friends that I was with. He started moving that wrist around again. I think he might have ran into a screen or something. And so I know it's something that at the very least has bothered him a little bit. And for those who haven't followed Romeo before he came to Bloomington, that's been an issue for quite a while. He injured it in a game. I want to say it was last year that he injured it in a game. He was out for maybe 2 or 3 games, and it basically took away any chance that he had of catching Damon Bailey on the Indiana high school all-time scoring list. And ever since he had, at least in high school, he had it heavily taped, would always kind of hold his finger and his thumb at his wrist while he would move his fingers back and forth on his injured hand. And then, so every once in a while you start to catch him doing it again. And I know he's done it at least a little bit this season. So I don't know. I'm with you though on the 3-point shot. Something's not right, and free throws the same way. Something's not right, but it's not something I expect to last the entire season.
Well, and he has so much wrist action in his shot too. Any problem with his wrist, it seems like it would exacerbate, the negative impact of that. So hopefully that's something that gets fixed. There's so many other storylines for this season. Obviously, the continuation of the turnover issue, that's been a big problem. Al Durham's on the positive side. Al Durham's emergence as a real solid contributor, especially as a 3-point shooter early in the season. But I think probably the other most important one, and the other most talked about one, and the one that will probably determine how good this team can be, is Justin Smith. Who really in many ways has regressed offensively. Certainly, both the numbers and the eye test, he just doesn't quite look like the same guy offensively. I did think that last night, Alex, against Penn State, it was more of the same offensively, but I thought defensively, he took on the challenge of guarding Lamar Stevens and really competed hard and beat him to spots and forced him into tough shots. He led Indiana in rebounding, and we had talked to him on the assembly call. We did a long segment on him on Assembly Call Radio about how, maybe for him with really struggling to finish, struggling with his passing and just some basic stuff on offense, if he can maybe build some positive momentum and confidence defensively that helps carry over, maybe he can get himself going that way. It didn't necessarily happen because, like I said, his offense wasn't that good against Penn State, but I was at least encouraged to see that he really took on that challenge of guarding one of the Big Ten's most productive and high usage players in Lamar Stevens, and for the most part, I thought did really well with it.
Yeah, and I wonder with Justin if we all talked about the offseason, the big leap that was coming, and maybe that's our fault a little bit for maybe putting the expectations on him too high, and he's just a sophomore. It's not like he was a McDonald's All-American coming in to Indiana. The 48-inch vertical thing in the offseason probably didn't help either, because people, they look at a guy and say, wow, he's athletic, he should finish every play. Well, he's got to get better finishing around the rim. We all know that, but that's not grounds for some of the things that that I've had tweeted at me in terms of what's being said on social media. But I agree with you. He made a positive impact for the most part in yesterday's game with his rebounding and his defense on Lamar Stevens. Lamar Stevens, going into yesterday's game, I don't know if he's still there, was in the top 10 in the Ken Palm Player of the Year standing. So it's not like this is some Joe Schmo from Rutgers that he locked up. He was big on Lamar Stevens. If Lamar Stevens comes out and gets 20 or 25, Indiana's not winning that game. So I think Justin Smith, more than anything else, needs to get some confidence finishing at the rim. He's not doing it effectively right now, and sometimes when he misses a layup or doesn't finish, he's hanging his head. His teammates need to pick him up. The coaching staff, obviously Archie had a lot of nice things to say about him after the Northwestern game. He's just too talented of a player to say, we're not going to play this guy, or we're going to put this guy on the bench. I think he's going to figure it out at some point, and Indiana fans have to hope that happens sooner rather than later. Yeah,
and look, the other thing that I would say here is I would challenge Indiana fans who are really upset with Justin Smith. And good Lord, you talk about not, some of the stuff not being warranted. I mean, some of the stuff I've seen from him is, and I went on a big rant about this on Assembly Call, so I'm not going to do it again, but it's despicable, some of the stuff that's being said. But, I think to appreciate his contributions so far this year, it's been more the subtle things. He's getting fouled almost double the amount that he did last year. His steal rate is up. He's producing some more things on defense. So, you see him go up for the big dunks and you see some of the really bad turnovers, and that sticks out, and they are memorably bad plays. I get it. And he's, he is struggling. There's no way around it. But, I would challenge IU fans to take a little bit more nuanced view of some of the things he is doing positively and balance that out with your judgments and just be a little bit quicker to support your player rather than to jump down their throats. I just think a good rule for all of us to follow. Zach, your thought. And look, I mean, he's, right now his offensive rating is 89 on KenPom. I mean, that's not good. Last year it was 104.6, which was solid for a freshman. But I think there are, we're seeing enough things. I think that there are way more reasons to believe in him and to keep playing him and to think that things can turn around than not to. And one of the main ones is, around this time last year, he really struggled to the point where he got a DNP one game and wasn't playing many minutes, and he turned it around and really got going in Big Ten play. So it's important to remember that and keep all that, I think, in mind as we assess him, and let's not be quite so quick to jump to conclusions. Critique, that's fine, but let's not jump to conclusions on him yet. Zach, your thoughts on Justin?
I mean, yeah, nothing much more than what you guys have already said on him. We're all conditioned to look at the offensive side of the court first. It's just the way us cavemen do it. We just look at Are you scoring? Are you keeping us from scoring? That's the way we look at our own team, as it were. And with Justin, it just hasn't been the case for him. At least offensively. Defensively, especially late. I can remember a couple possessions late in the Penn State game where Justin made a difference. An offensive rebound I can think of, a steal I can think of in the last couple of minutes of the game that I know they didn't happen right at the end, but they were obviously crucial when you look at the final score. I think one of the things that might, let me give you a quick story. So I have, as most of you do, have a text chain of our immediate IU friends that we can just go crazy during the game, texting back and forth with. It's maybe it's less quantity than Twitter. Sometimes more vile, sometimes less vile. But I think there are times in the game, at least in my little friends chain, where, and I tend to agree with it, where if the mistake is made by Justin Smith, or maybe multiple mistakes are made, especially on the offensive end with Justin Smith, it seems as though it's always been Archie's his philosophy, at least with Justin. Hey, let's leave him in. And by the way, do we really have anybody to replace him at his position? I don't know. Leave him in the game. Whereas, okay, now the question then becomes, all right, is that working? If that is indeed the case, and you agree that Archie is keeping Justin in the game despite mistakes on the offensive end, just to let him go, hey, whether it's be to make him feel better or to show you have confidence in the guy. If you agree with that, then is it working? And if the answer is yes, then by all means keep him in. If the answer is no, then let's see what the bench does when you put him on the bench specifically for not playing well and not for another reason. Whether it be rotations or
that's happened a couple times though. I mean, he's made turnovers and been pulled pretty quickly.
It has. I think there would be some people that would like that number to rise. I'm of the ilk that I don't know if there's another. Well, I don't. It's not that I don't know. I do know there's not another Justin Smith type on this team. So when you pull Justin, and a lot of the rotations that Archie uses, if you pull Justin Smith away from that five on the court, the new fifth guy just. I can see it at least. I don't feel like it fits. So I get that he stays on the court sometimes when maybe it's not necessarily warranted. So, and there are some times that Archie does pull the plug. But I'm sure there are some people out there that are wanting it more. I'm not necessarily saying I'm in that group, but I think there are some out there.
The other thing is, not only is there not another player on the roster like him, there's not, besides Romeo Langford and JaJuan Morgan, a player with the same upside to be, at his ceiling is high. And so as a coach, you have to look at that and say, I have to do everything I can to get this guy's confidence built back up, because if he's playing well, he makes the ceiling of our team a whole lot higher than a guy like, let's say, Clifton Moore, Jake. I don't know who you're going to put in for him. I mean, Zach McRoberts is now back, but he hasn't looked like himself right now either. So I think Archie's kind of trying to strike a balance between, let's try to do the best we can to win games and put the best lineups we can, and also realizing that Justin Smith has proven that he can be a productive player, and if he's playing well, our team has a chance to be a lot better because of that. And that's that's another thing. We've talked about Indiana needs this third, fourth, fifth guy to emerge. It's been different guys in different spots. Some people are now. I noticed a big thread on the forum today. Al Durham's quietly becoming IU's third best player. I think after a couple games from now, if Devontae Green comes out and hits some threes, it's going to be Devontae Green. But the consistency for that third, fourth, and fifth guy, you hope by the time you hit January, February, March that you got that locked in. And I think ultimately the coaching staff wants Justin Smith to be one of those guys, and so they have to do everything they can to keep getting his confidence built.
It's more than just wanting him; they need him to be that guy.
Right. Well, exactly, they do need him to be that guy. You're right.
Yeah. I want to look ahead. I want to talk Louisville. Talk about the importance of these next two games. Any other individual players or storylines that you guys want to hit before we move on, and any other burning opinions or thoughts?
Not really. I guess JaJuan's okay. That was one thing that
it was so huge to see. He didn't look quite right, but just his presence is.
Oh my gosh! I mean,
so important.
Again, our little text chain is like, when that happened in the Northwestern game, it was like, all right, end of season. Like, that's fine, whatever. But no, it was nice to see that he was serviceable, and I did like. I thought there were some play sets for him specifically late in the game. I know I have already barked about Romeo getting the ball late. They were trying to get the ball late to JaJuan, and he converted, and I thought that was very big given the circumstances of his shin injury.
Yeah, Alex, anything else you want to hit?
I mean, just following up on JaJuan, and I wrote this in my Penn State preview, and it was just kind of something that popped into my mind. I remember last year when he got hurt at Michigan State, and it looked like his ankle was going to be something that kept him out for an extended period of time. And then all of a sudden he's like back out there the next game against Maryland and
had one of his better games of the season.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, if he can walk, he's going to play. Remember going back to his freshman year when he had that his shoulder kept popping out of socket, and they just like put it back in and he'd be in the next game. And so
he's a tough dude, man.
He is a tough guy. So not surprised that he played. I agree with Zach that he kind of just looked maybe a step slow or a half step slower, but you hope with the extra rest, because they obviously have 3 days off before the Louisville game this weekend, and then they got Butler, and then hopefully everyone can get healthy as they head into the rest of the Big Ten season. One
last thing I do want to talk about before we talk about Louisville, and that's Clifton Moore. Alex, every single time we've had a mailbag, and every week when we do our mailbag on the assembly call, we get asked, why isn't Clifton Moore playing more? Why isn't Jake Forrester playing more? So we got to see Clifton Moore play last night because of some foul trouble. And here's my assessment of his time out there, and I want to get your thoughts on it. I think we saw enough to feel okay if he gets pressed into future duty, because he's got some athleticism to go make plays. Like the tip in that he made was a really nice play. The block that he made was a really nice play. But I also think we saw enough to know maybe why he's not playing more. Because while he plays hard when he's out there, like he goes hard, his positioning and attention to detail defensively just aren't there yet. And for a coach who is such a stickler about that in Archie, and for a team that is going to be defined by its defense, there were several plays, it wasn't the block, but there were several plays where because he's out of position, other guys have to rotate, and it hurts the whole defense. So, so I think at least some of the reaction I saw was maybe a little bit too much of an overreaction to the positive because of the highlights. But again, if you watch it on a possession-by-possession basis, I understand maybe why he's not out there as much based on what we saw with, I guess, what could be described as extended playing time for him, because that's the most that he's played last night in a big game. What do you think about it?
Yeah, he looks, to me, he did some good things, but it's like he's a half step slow to react on things, and I think that's something that can improve over time. But I also think that he has to long term be able, to get some reps, and I just don't necessarily see in the schedule coming up. I mean, there's two guarantee games left on the schedule later in the month, and then we're back into the Big Ten play, and so the schedule kind of dictated this year that IU, they had those 2 games against UC Davis and UT Arlington that were closer than expected. He didn't get into. I think those would have been valuable for him to just get playing time. But I think if he sticks with it, he's a guy that can continue to develop. I just don't know that on this team he's going to be anything more than, 5 or 8 minutes per game spot duty. And, he seemed to have a really good attitude after the game last night. I'm not sure if you watched his interview, but he actually had a huge smile on his face and was glad that he had the opportunity to get out there and make a contribution. But I agree with you, Jerod. There was some good things, but you also kind of saw, against a better team, why he's not playing consistently.
And it takes some big guys a while. Some big guys, don't come around until their junior or senior year. And there's enough there that I'm still excited about his potential, but just not quite ready to say yet, oh, well, he should be playing 15, 20 minutes a game. Zach, what you had a thought?
I'll just throw in that, while I'm in agreement that it doesn't look like he's ready, and especially on the defensive end, I think that was fairly obvious for sure. The counterpoint to that is, look, man, I mean, if JaJuan's going to have 2 fouls in the first 5 minutes of every game, and Deron Davis is going to have foul trouble, I mean, if not the UT Arlington game or the UC Davis game or what have you, then when? Like, when can you have this time to go out there and at least against a formidable opponent like Penn State, be able to show Clifton the day after the game, hey, look, here's what you're doing wrong. Now, this is against a legitimate opponent. Here's what you're doing wrong. Dude, we need you. We need you because we have some guys on this team that play your spot that are kind of prone to foul. So let's figure it out. So I'm kind of the other way. I would like to see him get 7 minutes a game. It doesn't have to be much, but just enough to know that if JaJuan gets into foul trouble and Deron or what have you, whatever the case may be, that he can go and fill 5, 7, 9 minutes if he absolutely has to. I'm not asking for any more than that, but these are the kind of games where I think it serves him well to get in, even if it doesn't look great.
Yeah, maybe if the UT Arlington and UC Davis games hadn't been so competitive, he would have gotten some time in those games. But the way that things are trending with the foul trouble, he may get some of those minutes anyway. So that may be a moot point. All right, let's look ahead. Let's talk about Louisville, Zach. You're down there. Louisville, they're going to enter probably as a top 50 team in Ken Palm. They're 48th right now. Obviously, they had the really strong performance against Michigan State where they beat them. They've lost to Tennessee, lost to Marquette. But I think all in all, at least I didn't look at them real closely before the season, but it feels like they're maybe further along at this point in the season than people thought. So credit to Chris Mack, who's obviously a very solid coach. And they play Central Arkansas before they come in to meet Indiana. What kind of team is coming in to Simon Scott Assembly Hall, and how do they match up with Indiana?
I think they match up well. Louisville is a team that, and let me say this. I think there's going to be a lot of opponents of Louisville who are going to think they match up well with Louisville. And I think Indiana is one of them. Louisville is not more talented than Indiana. However, I don't think Louisville is going to be more talented and is not more talented than Michigan State. They're not more talented, in my opinion, than Marquette. And I know a lot of my Louisville brethren who listen to this will call me crazy. I don't think they're more talented than Tennessee. And I would even say from a talent standpoint, they might be about even with a Seton Hall, who they have also already beaten on the road. And and yet they're winning games. So I think there is there's a coach in there now that, on top of just probably being a good X's and O's coach, he's got guys that are, for lack of a better term, kind of a hodgepodge. All right, there's some guys that left with Patino that didn't come back. There's some guys that were relegated to the bench under David Padgett, who was there as the interim coach for a year last year, that are now kind of all of a sudden being forced into a role and doing all right. Okoye Gao is one of those guys who I'm sure you will hear about. Jordan Wara is all of a sudden becoming the player that a lot of people thought he might be early on, but he's a guy who started the year on the bench for Louisville. It's very odd the way that this team has kind of been put together, which, by the way, which includes some transfers, and it's just all kind of a hodgepodge. I don't know of another way to put it, but they're kind of led on some nights by a guy who can really shoot, by the name of Ryan McMahon, who is 170 pounds, probably dripping wet, but he can hit the three. And I honestly think that this team has a very good chance to kill you from the 3-point line if you let them. Ryan McMahon being at the top of that list. But that being said, Indiana is the better team, and I think we'll probably say this with a lot of opponents that IU plays this year. But Indiana will have the best athlete on the floor in this game, if not maybe the top two, at least offensively, best players on the floor. So we'll see what happens. I think if IU can shoot the three well, because I think Louisville is they're pretty good at protecting the rim. If IU can shoot the outside ball well, I don't think I think I'm pretty comfortable with saying I think IU wins. If they don't, and I know that's a huge question mark, then I think this is going to be a barn burner of a game. I really do.
Alex, you look at their statistical profile, a couple of things that really jump out. They are number one in the country in free throw rate. So they're drawing a lot of fouls, which obviously has been a problem for Indiana, and they're making a lot of their free throws. So, if it's a close game, that's certainly something that is going to help them. And Indiana shot free throws better against Penn State, so hopefully they're ready to do that again. What do you look at as some of the keys to victory for Indiana in this game?
Yeah, I mean, the free throws are obviously huge, and I don't necessarily think the free throw rate travels well to a place like Assembly Hall. Historically, Indiana's kept teams off the line. Archie Miller's teams, for the most part, over his career, done a pretty good job of not fouling. The things I look at with Louisville. I mean, their point distribution on twos is crazy low. Obviously, they're getting fouled a lot, so that kind of takes that down a little bit. And the 3-point shooting is good, but not great. Not percentage-wise, I don't think they're any higher than Indiana. They're 35.6% as a team.
Hey, real quick, point distribution on twos. Explain that real quick, just for maybe people who aren't as well versed with the Ken Palm numbers like we are.
Yeah, basically, if you have a subscription to Ken Palm and you have access to the team pages, you can scroll down and see for every team, it divides their points into 3-pointers, 2-pointers, and free throws, and just kind of gives you a percentage of each area, how many of percent of the team's points come from that number. And Louisville's 29.9% of its points are coming from the free throw line. And so if they can't get to the line in Bloomington, and Indiana does a decent enough job defending without fouling, I think that's absolutely pivotal. Zach is right on the 3-point shooting. I think they have three guys who are capable of, Jordan Wara. I don't know exactly how you say it. Zach, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think the N is silent.
Okay, Jordan Wara is only shooting 27% on threes so far this season. But if he gets going, he's a guy that can knock down 3 or 4 in a row, and all of a sudden you're like, this guy's pretty darn good. He's kind of a streaky guy. Ryan McMahon, as Zach mentioned, I don't even know if he's 170 pounds, Zach. You might have been generous on that. But 41% 3-point shooter. Darius Perry's another guy, 53% right now. And then Dwayne Sutton is kind of a guy that transferred in. He's originally from Louisville. I don't know exactly where he went his first couple of years of college, but transferred back home from a mid-major type situation. And he's really been
UNC Asheville.
Okay. Yeah, he's been outstanding so far this year. Not a high usage guy, but he's making 43.5% of his threes. I think the area where Indiana really needs to go in this game is into the paint as much as possible. Steven Enoch has been a guy, he's a transfer from UConn that's gotten into foul trouble quite a bit. Beyond that, they just, Malik Williams is a big guy that Indiana recruited. A lot of fans will remember him, but he's not a guy that likes to play inside the paint, doesn't really like a ton of contact. And then Okoye Gal is a guy who's been playing well early in the season. But, if Louisville has to play him a ton of minutes against, Deron Davis and JaJuan Morgan, I don't think that's a favorable development. So I think it's going to be an interesting competitive game. I agree with Zach that, if Indiana doesn't keep them off the foul line and kind of lets them hit some threes and get going, it could be one of those games that comes down to the wire.
What do you expect, Alex, in terms of atmosphere at Simon Scott Assembly Hall? Because the Marquette game is obviously pretty electric. Northwestern, at least from people I talked to that were there, not quite so much. And we've been looking forward to this game for 3 years because this is the third Louisville game. This one's at home, but it's not quite the same Louisville. There's no Rick Pitino, and while I think they're an ascendant program under Chris Mack, they're not quite there yet. Do you think it'll be kind of one of those electric Simon Scott Assembly Hall atmospheres on Saturday?
Yeah, I expect it to be probably better than what we saw from Marquette, just because it's a regional rivalry. There's a lot of, IU fans who obviously don't like Louisville. They don't like Kentucky, and they're going to show up. And this is one of the marquee non-conference home games on the schedule. And you also kind of look at the ticket market for this game. It's been one of the more expensive tickets all season. So it tells me there's been a pretty big demand for people to get in the door. Now, I don't think it's going to come anywhere close to what we saw, for the Kentucky game in 2011 or some of the, the Big Ten games when Indiana was, ranked number one in the country. But I think it'll be pretty darn close to a full house, maybe some open seats in the balconies. But I think there'll be, especially after IU starting out 2-0 in the Big Ten, Romeo playing Louisville, where a lot of people thought he was going to end up before everything went down. I think it's going to be quite an atmosphere.
Zach, yeah, go ahead, Zach.
I was just going to throw in, and sorry I didn't give you any cue there. I was looking back at Michigan State and their play against Louisville, and obviously there's a couple ways to go about that. Did Michigan State play their best game? I think a lot of people that watched that game would probably agree that they didn't. So take these numbers with that grain of salt in mind. But to Alex's point, Nick Ward went 5 of 8. Most of that stuff was in the paint during his night against them. Xavier Tillman off the bench, 5 of 8 from inside the paint. And then also this team, and this is kind of where I've kind of got the notion that if Indiana can shoot the ball well from outside, that they won't have to worry necessarily too much about having Louisville block their shot from inside. But the team was 8 of 20 from 3-point range. Michigan State was against Louisville. They were 8 of 20 in the game. Aarons was 3 of 6. Langford 4 of 10. Langford was a man against them and carried them, I think, to even the overtime finish. So they are susceptible to at least against quality opponents. And I haven't looked at the KenPom on this, but it looks like they're susceptible to giving up a 3-point shot every now and again. Again, I probably need to look a little harder before I come out and say that, but that's kind of those are the couple of things that I would point out. And by the way, rebounding. Louisville has the type of team that will get out rebounded, but I think a lot of that has to do with whoever their opponent is. Now, Michigan State out rebounded them completely off the court. I'm looking at it 47-30 in their game. So that's something else I think to keep an eye on in the matchup.
One last thing I want to talk about, Alex. You look at these two games coming up. You've got Louisville on Saturday and then Butler the following Saturday. So the first thing you notice is that large gap between games. Archie Miller has to be just salivating at the thought of being able to practice for a week with everybody healthy. So, knock on wood, all that stuff. Let's get out of the Louisville game healthy, get a week to practice with all these guys, which we haven't had, and that should really be important for this team. The other thing is because Indiana won the game against Northwestern, the game against Penn State, this kind of 5-game gauntlet that began with the Duke game. You go into these games against Louisville, Butler now, you could probably lose one of them without it feeling like a total disaster, but you could also make an argument that these are two kind of must-wins for Indiana. Because, number one, the Louisville game is at home, and you really need to take care of business at home. And it's, you look at the KenPom ratings, it's only a Tier B game because Louisville is, just hovering around that top 50 mark. So it's a game that you really feel like you should win at home. And Butler is your only other opportunity to get a non-conference win away from home, which is a NCAA tournament resume checkbox that you really want to check. So, you're sitting at 7-2. You're in a good spot again. You could lose one of these without it being a disaster. And yet there are some real reasons, that you need to find a way to win both of these games kind of individually when you look at them. So, for a lot of reasons, both because of that and just because of how important that week of practice will be between them, it's a really important stretch for Indiana to get some important work done on the court with results that will count, and then off the court with how much better they can get during this practice time.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 5-game stretch. I didn't really even I referred to it the Duke game and then the 4-game stretch because I don't realistically think they were going to beat Duke. And I said if they could go in the 4-game stretch 3-1, that would be a good now they're 2-0. So, and you mentioned them needing to take care of business at home. That's absolutely the case. I mean, they haven't lost a home game yet this season. They're going to have a great crowd. You have to take advantage of that. And then, say they can win this game, you get a week off to prepare for Butler in a neutral court game, but it'll be more of a pro IU crowd. And so what a great opportunity for Indiana these next 2 games. And you got the 2 non-conference games. And then I'll be interested to see how they utilize that break from, I think it's December 22nd or 23rd until January 3rd.
Yeah, 22nd through the 3rd.
That could be a back to basics type of boot camp situation where they're working
how
on
to pass the ball,
kind of the dribble handoffs and how to, find angles on passing. I think that's kind of one of the biggest complaints of this team so far. But, they Louisville plays tonight, so Indiana's got an extra day of rest going into this game. They've historically been really tough to beat in kind of these marquee non-conference home games. And so, this is, that Penn State game was absolutely huge for them to get because now, these next 2, you don't go into them feeling like you have to win both. If you do win both, I think you have a really good chance to be something like 12-2 going into to Ann Arbor next month. So that would be quite a turnaround from where things were after the Duke game.
Yeah, and but you want to get some work done now because after that Illinois game, once the Michigan game starts, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight games that are Tier A games according to KenPom, and then the whole rest of the Big Ten schedule is a Tier A or Tier B game because it's just top 50 teams all over the place, home and away. So it's going to be tough.
It's going to be one of those seasons where I think for everybody but Michigan, going 11-9 or 12-8 in the Big Ten is going to be like a really good season.
Yeah.
Let me add something to that because last year IU was, if I'm not mistaken, 9-9 in the Big Ten, and for all intents and purposes, we all kind of knew at that point, hey, if this team goes 9-9 in the Big Ten, there's no chance this team is getting into the NCAA tournament. And I think we all kind of, if you look back, we go, okay, well, that's kind of because, obviously the Indiana State loss last year, the Fort Wayne loss last year, obviously those things are things you cannot do. But even some of the other non-conference games, like the Louisville, like the Seton Hall last year, I think if those get even with the losses to Indiana State and Fort Wayne, if you can have a couple of those non-conference games that were certainly winnable turn around, then Indiana's probably in the tournament last year. This year, you have the loss to Arkansas, okay, and kind of like Alex alluded to, we all assumed Duke was going to be a loss. You already have that one non-conference loss that you're already going, oh, man, if we could have had that one, and if you can kind of limit that, then that can you're able to go perhaps 10-10 in the Big Ten, especially with how good some of those teams are at the top, and they're gonna hand a lot of other teams a lot of losses this year. There's going to be a lot of splits between teams that play each other twice in the Big Ten this year. I assume 11-9 is going to get you in. In my opinion, 11-9 in the Big Ten is going to get you into the tournament.
Oh yeah.
if you're not losing to Butler, Louisville, and Arkansas all in the non-conference. And I know that's a tough task, but one of these two games I think would go a super long way, assuming that you think you're going to finish in the top, 5 or 6, hopefully, of the Big Ten.
Yep. All right. Well, good chat, gentlemen.
Every team not named Illinois and Rutgers is in the top. Every Big Ten team not named Illinois or Rutgers right now is in the top 55 of Ken Palm. So,
and Rutgers just snuck into the top 100, which is actually an achievement for them based on where they've been recently.
A couple of years ago, they were in like the 200s. I mean, this is it's really. I mean, it's crazy.
Let me throw this at you. Let's bookmark this conversation for March. Does a below 500 Big Ten record get into the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, there will be a team that finishes below one of the teams that's done some work in the non-conference. Like at Ohio State. Yeah, that's the first one that came to mind. Yeah, I bet so.
I'm not sure they're going to go under 500. They're
right. But if a team like that, just because of, look, there's going to be so many games that are decided by a bounce here and there. Look at just last night with the 2 games decided by 2 points. There's going to be a lot of games like that. So a good team may just have a couple bad bounces, and lose a few of those games, be on the wrong side of it. But because of the strength of the conference this year, they'll be propelled up. Whereas last year, a team could get 13 wins and, like Nebraska did, and not even make the tournament. So,
the team I'm looking at right now, as I look at their Ken Palm page, they're 14th in Ken Palm, Purdue, right? Their best win is Davidson. And they've got, here's their next 3 games. Maryland at home, at Texas, Notre Dame on a neutral court. And their Big Ten schedule is brutal.
Need to win some of those.
They're going to be a team, I feel like, that could be around that 10-10, 11-9. It could be an interesting case study if they don't win some of these upcoming non-conference games.
Yep. All right, well, gentlemen, this was fun. Zach, we got to do this again sometime, either here or the assembly call. We always appreciate having you on from your your beautiful home studio.
Oh, yes. Always happy that you ask, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Alex, good talking, and we'll be back, I suppose, next week. We'll record on a Wednesday, right in the midst of Indiana's long week of practice. Will we get any insight on that, you think? Kind of what they're doing, how they use that week of practice? I'm assuming Archie will have an availability in there somewhere.
Yeah, it might be a good question to ask post game on Saturday if things go well. Just kind of what they're gonna do the rest of the week.
Test the waters with the PR staff. Is that what you're saying?
If they lose, might not be the best question because I think it's pretty self-explanatory what they're going to be working on. But if they win, it'd be maybe a little more insightful answer. But yeah, they're going to have a ton of practice time coming up this next month. And Archie's talked a lot about just not having the bodies, and I'm sure he's really looking forward to this upcoming stretch to kind of hone in on some of these problematic areas.
Yes.
Before Big Ten play starts up again.
But they're correctable. That's the thing. You can fix some of these things. So hopefully Indiana will be able to use this time wisely coming up and do that. All right. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll talk to you on the assembly call after the IU Louisville game, and then we'll talk to you back here on Podcast on the Brink next week to talk about what happened there, look ahead to Butler, and just assess where this team is at. Thanks for being here, and we'll talk to you then. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com, and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.